August 479 BCE. A Persian general named Mardonius stands at the height of his power. He commands the largest army ever assembled on Greek soil. Tens of thousands of elite Persian warriors, including the legendary immortals. His brother-in-law Xerxes, the king of kings, has entrusted him with one mission: finish what Salamis started. Crush the Greeks. Add their cities to the Persian Empire. Mardonius has every advantage: superior numbers, cavalry that dominates the open plains, supply lines that stretch back to the greatest empire the world has ever seen. Across the Asopus River, a ragged coalition of Greek city-states watches him. Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, men who spent the last 11 days refusing to give battle on his terms. But today, Mardonius sees something that makes him smile. The Greek lines are falling apart. A botched night retreat has left them scattered, disorganized, vulnerable. He gives the order to attack. In a few hours, one of them will be dead, and the fate of Western civilization will be decided. 1 year earlier, the world watched Greece burn. Xerxes had done what no one thought possible. He bridged the Hellespont itself, lashing together hundreds of ships to march his army across the sea. The greatest invasion force in human history poured into Europe like a flood. Ancient sources claim over 2 million men. Modern historians say the number was smaller, perhaps 150,000 to 300,000 soldiers. But even the conservative estimates are staggering. Against them, a handful of squabbling Greek city-states that couldn't agree on anything. You know what happened next. Thermopylae. 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies held the hot gates against the entire Persian army. They bought Greece 3 precious days with their blood. King Leonidas became immortal, not because he won, but because he chose to die rather than retreat. But here's what the movies don't tell you. Thermopylae was a defeat. The Persians marched through. Athens fell. The Acropolis burned. The temples that had stood for generations turned to ash and blackened stone. Greek refugees fled to the islands, watching smoke rise from everything they had ever known. Greek civilization stood at the edge of annihilation. And then came Salamis. The Greek fleet, outnumbered, outgunned, fighting with their backs against extinction, lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits. What followed was a massacre, but not the massacre Xerxes expected. Persian ships, packed too tightly to maneuver, became floating coffins. Greek triremes rammed them, boarded them, sent them to the bottom of the Aegean. By sunset, the greatest navy the world had ever seen was scattered wreckage. Xerxes watched from his golden throne on the shore. And for the first time, the King of Kings felt something unfamiliar: fear. Within days, Xerxes gathered his personal guard and began the long march home. The man who had come to conquer the world was running away. But he didn't take everyone with him. Mardonius stayed behind. Think about this for a moment. Xerxes left his best general, his own brother-in-law, with a hand-picked force of elite troops. The mission was simple: finish the job. The navy was gone, yes, but the Persian army remained intact, still massive, still terrifying, still more than capable of grinding Greece into dust. And Mardonius? He wanted this. The ancient sources tell us he was ambitious, hungry. He had convinced Xerxes to invade Greece in the first place. Some say he dreamed of ruling the conquered Greek lands himself, a satrap answering to no one but the distant King of Kings. Now he had his chance. Mardonius spent the winter preparing. He kept the best of the best, the immortals, Persia's legendary elite guard, cavalry from the eastern provinces, men who had been riding since before they could walk, archers whose arrows could darken the sky, infantry from every corner of the empire. When spring came, Mardonius moved south. He sent Messengers to Athens first. Generous terms. Join us, and you'll rule all of Greece under Persian protection. Your city will be rebuilt grander than before." The Athenians had every reason to accept. Their city was rubble. Their people were refugees. They refused. Then they executed the messenger. When Mardonius heard this, he burned Athens again. Whatever the flames had missed the first time, they consumed now. Stone by stone, the Persians dismantled what remained. But here's the thing about Greeks. They're stubborn. Impossibly, infuriatingly stubborn. Instead of breaking them, Mardonius had done something miraculous. He had united them. What happened next had never happened before in Greek history. The city-states stopped fighting each other. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Megara, Tegea, Plataea, dozens of others. Cities that had spent centuries at each other's throats looked at the Persian horde and made a choice. They would stand together, or they would die separately. The army that, assembled in the summer of 479 BCE, was the largest Greek force ever gathered. Ancient sources give us numbers ranging from 30,000 to over 100,000. Modern estimates suggest around 40,000 heavy infantry, hoplites, plus thousands of support troops. Against Mardonius's army? Still outnumbered. Perhaps badly outnumbered. But for the first time, the Greeks had something they'd never had before: unity. The Spartans marched out in full force. Not 300 this time, but thousands. 5,000 Spartiates, the full citizen warriors, the largest Spartan army to ever leave the Peloponnese. The Athenians contributed 8,000 hoplites, men who had lost everything and were fighting for ashes. And leading them all, a Spartan regent named Pausanias, nephew of the legendary Leonidas, a man who had something to prove. The Greeks marched north. Mardonius watched them come, and he smiled. Because Mardonius understood something about Greeks. They were magnificent fighters. Man for man, a Greek hoplite was the most dangerous infantry soldier in the ancient world. But they had weaknesses. They were slow. Their heavy armor meant they couldn't pursue cavalry. They needed flat ground to form their phalanx, and flat ground was exactly where Persian horsemen would slaughter them. They needed water. A Greek army drank rivers dry. And most importantly, they were proud. So proud they could barely cooperate. The coalition was fragile, held together by fear alone. Mardonius had a plan. He wouldn't attack head-on. He would make them come to him. Choose the battlefield. Use his cavalry to cut their supply lines, foul their water, harass them until they broke formation. The Persian general withdrew to the plains near a small Greek town, a town called Plataea, and there he would wait. The Greeks followed. Of course they did. What choice did they have? But when they arrived at Plataea, they found Mardonius waiting in the worst possible position. For them, the Persian army was encamped on the north side of the Asopus River. Wide, flat plains stretched behind them. Perfect cavalry country. Mardonius had even built a fortified camp, wooden walls and ditches protecting his supplies. A fortress in the middle of Greece. The Greeks took position on the lower slopes of Mount Cithaeron, on the south side of the river. High ground, rocky terrain. Terrible for cavalry charges. And there, for 11 impossible days, both armies froze. Picture it. Two of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen. Close enough to see each other's campfires at night. Close enough to hear each other's war songs. Neither one moved. Why? Because both commanders understood the mathematics of death. If Mardonius attacked uphill, into the Greek phalanx, his cavalry would be useless on the rocky slopes. His infantry, with their wicker shields and shorter spears, would shatter against the bronze-armored wall of Greek hoplites. He would lose, If the Greeks came down to the plains, they would die. Persian horsemen would encircle them. Archers would shower them with arrows until the sky turned black. Superior numbers would overwhelm them from every direction. So they waited. But here's what Mardonius understood. Time was his weapon. The Greeks had marched north with whatever supplies they could carry. No fortified camp, no supply lines, just men, armor, and hope. Every day they waited, they grew weaker, and Mardonius was about to make sure of it. Day 8. The Persian cavalry commander Mecistius led his horsemen across the river. Not a full attack, something worse, a raid. The Persian cavalry swept along the Greek lines like wolves circling wounded prey. They didn't engage the phalanx directly. That would be suicide. Instead, they did something far more devastating. They found the springs. The Greeks had positioned themselves near the Gargaffian spring, their only reliable water source. Mecistius's cavalry didn't just attack the men guarding it, they destroyed it. Horses trampled the banks. Soldiers fouled the water with mud and debris. By the time the Persians withdrew, the spring was useless. 40,000 men. No water. Do you understand what this means? A man can fight without food for days. Without water? In the Greek summer heat, wearing bronze armor? You have hours, maybe a day before the cramps start, before your vision blurs, before you collapse. Mardonius hadn't fired a single arrow at the main Greek force. He was killing them with thirst. But something unexpected happened during that raid. Mecistius, the Persian cavalry commander, one of the most respected warriors in Mardonius's army, pushed too close to the Greek lines. His horse was hit by an arrow. It threw him. A Persian cavalry commander, on the ground, surrounded by Greek hoplites. What happened next was brutal. Mecistius wore scale armor, bronze plates layered like fish scales. The Greeks stabbed at him, but their spears couldn't penetrate. He fought like a demon, killing several men even as he was surrounded. Finally, someone found the gap, a spear through the eye slot of his helmet. The Persians charged desperately to recover his body. Fighting erupted across the entire front. For a few chaotic minutes, the battle almost started right there. But the Greeks held. They kept the body. That night they paraded Mecistius' corpse along the entire Greek line. Every soldier saw the dead Persian commander. Every man cheered. It was a small victory, a single death against an army of tens of thousands. But for men who had been watching their water disappear, who had been wondering if they would die of thirst before they ever raised their spears, it was everything. The Greeks could kill Persians. They could win. Mardonius felt the loss. Mecistius had been a friend, a trusted commander. But the Persian general was too smart to let grief cloud his judgment. The strategy was working. The Greeks were suffering. And then his scouts brought news that made him smile. The Greek army was moving. After 8 days on the slopes, the coalition had shifted position, moving to a new location called the Island, a narrow strip of land between two branches of a stream. Better water access, more defensible terrain. But that's not what made Mardonius smile. It was how they moved. The Greeks marched at night, and in the darkness, something went wrong. Units got separated. Commands were confused. By dawn, the Greek army wasn't in one position. It was in 3. The center contingents, troops from Corinth, Megara, and other smaller cities, had somehow ended up near the town of Plataea itself, too far from the others to provide support. The Athenians, who held the left wing, were isolated on another part of the field. And the Spartans? The Spartans were completely alone. Dawn broke on that August morning. Mardonius climbed to a vantage point and looked out at the Greek positions. What he saw must have seemed like a gift from the gods. The most feared, soldiers in Greece, the legendary Spartans, the men who had held Thermopylae, the warriors that every Persian soldier had been taught to respect, were exposed, isolated on the Greek right wing, cut off from their allies, seemingly in the middle of a chaotic retreat. This was the moment. 11 days of waiting, 11 days of patient strategy, and now the Greeks had made a fatal mistake. Mardonius gave the order. The Persian cavalry thundered across the Asopus River. Behind them came the infantry, wave after wave of soldiers from every corner of the empire. The immortals marched in their gleaming armor. Archers readied their bows. The entire Persian army committed to the attack. They were charging straight at the Spartans, and Mardonius himself rode at the head of his elite guard. He wouldn't watch this victory from a distance. He would be there when the Spartans broke. He would finish what Thermopylae started. But here's what Mardonius didn't know. The Spartans weren't retreating. They weren't confused. They were waiting. What looked like chaos, the scattered positions, the night march gone wrong, wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. And Mardonius had just walked into it. The Spartans saw the Persians coming, thousands of cavalry, tens of thousands of infantry. The dust cloud alone must have been visible for miles, the thunder of hooves shaking the earth. Any other army would have panicked. Any other soldiers would have tried to run, to regroup, to find their scattered allies. The Spartans did something else. They stopped. Pausanias, the Spartan regent, gave a single command. The men planted their feet, raised their shields, lowered their spears, and they began to pray. This is one of the strangest moments in military history. The largest Persian force ever to attack a Greek position was charging directly at them, and the Spartans were conducting religious sacrifices. They slaughtered animals, read the entrails, looked for favorable omens. The omens were bad, so they sacrificed again. And again. Persian arrows began falling among them. Men died where they knelt. Still they prayed. Why? Because Spartans didn't fight without the gods' blessing. It was unthinkable. Their entire culture, their entire identity was built on the belief that they fought with divine favor. And right now, the gods were silent. Persian cavalry circled closer. Arrows fell like rain. The Tegeans, Greek allies positioned next to the Spartans, were screaming for permission to charge. Men were dying without ever raising their weapons. Pausanias kept sacrificing. Can you imagine it? The discipline required? To watch your brothers fall, to feel arrows striking shields around you, and to wait. This is what made Spartans terrifying. Not their strength, not their training, their patience. They would stand in that storm of death until the gods spoke, or until every last one of them was gone. And then, finally, the omens changed. The sacrifice was favorable. The gods had answered. Pausanias rose, drew his sword, and 5,000 Spartans, the greatest warriors the ancient world had ever produced, began to move, not retreat, not scatter, attack. The phalanx formation locked into place with mechanical precision, 8 ranks deep, shields overlapping, spears bristling forward like the spines of some enormous bronze beast. They advanced into the Persian cavalry, and the killing began. Now, let's talk about what happened next, because this is where the battle was won and lost. This is where everything changed. The Persian cavalry had been dominating for 11 days. Fast, deadly, impossible to pin down. But cavalry has a weakness. It cannot charge a solid formation head-on. Horses aren't suicidal. They won't run into a wall of spears. The Spartans knew this. Every Greek hoplite knew this. So when the phalanx locked, when that bronze wall started moving forward, the cavalry had to pull back. They tried hit-and-run attacks, arrows, javelins, anything to break the formation. The Spartans ignored them. Step by step, the phalanx advanced. Men fell to Persian missiles. The ranks closed. Another step. More arrows. The ranks closed again. Nothing stopped them. Mardonius watched from behind his infantry lines. He saw his cavalry failing to break the Spartan advance. He made a decision. If horsemen couldn't stop them, infantry would. He ordered his best troops forward. The Immortals. Persia's elite guard. The men who had broken through at Thermopylae. 10,000 warriors who had never known defeat. They formed up behind a barricade of wicker shields, planted them in the ground like a makeshift wall, and they waited for the Spartans to come. This was it. The best Persia had against the best Greece had. Bronze against wicker, phalanx against numbers. The collision was seconds away. The two lines met with a sound like thunder. Herodotus, the ancient historian who interviewed survivors of this battle, describes what happened next. The Persians fought with incredible bravery. They grabbed at Greek spears with their bare hands. They threw themselves at the shield wall again and again, but they were impossibly outmatched. A Greek hoplite carried a bronze-faced shield that weighed 15 pounds. His helmet was bronze, his breastplate was bronze, his greaves, leg armor, were bronze. He carried a 9-foot spear and a short iron sword. A Persian immortal carried a wicker shield, leather armor, a shorter spear, a shorter sword. In an open field with room to maneuver, Persian tactics could neutralize these disadvantages. They could use mobility, archery, numbers. But here, packed together in a grinding melee, it was murder. The Spartans pushed forward. Their spears punched through wicker shields like paper. Persian soldiers died in heaps. The Immortals, the most feared soldiers in the Persian Empire, were being butchered. But they didn't break. Not yet. Because Mardonius was still alive. Here's something crucial about ancient warfare. Morale was everything. An army didn't lose because every soldier died. An army lost because it broke, because men decided all at once that the battle was lost and running was better than fighting, and morale centered on leadership. As long as Mardonius was visible, fighting with his personal guard, rallying his men, the Persians would hold. They would die by the thousands, but they would not run. Mardonius knew this. He rode into the thickest fighting. He surrounded himself with 1,000 picked horsemen, the best warriors in his entire army. He would not lead from behind. He would win this battle personally, or die trying. The Spartans saw him. They knew what he meant. They knew that killing one man could end everything. The entire battle contracted around Mardonius like a fist closing. What happened next took less than an hour, maybe less than 30 minutes. The sources don't give us exact times, but they give us a name. Amnestus, a Spartan. One among thousands. History doesn't record his rank or his family or what he looked like. It records only what he did. In the chaos around Mardonius's position, Amnestus found his way through the Persian guard, through 1,000 elite horsemen, through the press of bodies and blood and screaming men. He reached Mardonius, and he killed him. The ancient sources say Mardonius fell from a blow to the head, a rock, a spear, a sword. They don't agree on the weapon. They agree on the result. Mardonius hit the ground, and in that instant, that single, impossible instant, the Persian Empire lost Greece forever. Herodotus tells us what happened next. His words are simple, devastating. As long as Mardonius lived, they held their ground and defended themselves, killing many Greeks. But after Mardonius fell, and the troops around him, the strongest part of the army, were destroyed. Then the rest broke and fled before the Spartans. Read that again. The strongest part of the army. The Immortals, the elite guard, 1,000 picked horsemen, the finest warriors Persia had to offer. Gone. And with them, every ounce of Persian courage. You have to understand how ancient battles worked. They weren't like modern warfare, Organized retreats, defensive lines, strategic withdrawals. When an ancient army broke, it shattered. One moment, soldiers were fighting. The next, they were running. And once the running started, it spread like wildfire. One man fled, then 10, then 100, then everyone. That's what happened to the Persian army at Plataea. The soldiers nearest Mardonius saw him fall. They saw his bodyguard overwhelmed. They saw the Spartans coming, bronze-covered monsters covered in Persian blood, stepping over heaps of their dead comrades. They ran. The soldiers behind them saw their comrades fleeing. They didn't know why. They didn't need to know. Panic is contagious. They ran too. Within minutes, the entire Persian right wing was in full retreat, and the Spartans pursued. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. Remember, the Greek army was scattered across 3 positions. The Spartans had been fighting alone. On the other side of the battlefield, the Athenians faced their own nightmare. The Greeks fighting with Persia. Yes, there were Greeks fighting for Mardonius, traitors from Thebes and other cities that had surrendered. These men attacked the Athenian position. This was Greek against Greek, hoplite against hoplite. The most brutal fighting imaginable. No advantage of armor here. No technological superiority. Just 2 phalanxes grinding against each other, shield against shield, spear against spear, until one side couldn't take it anymore. The Athenians held 8,000 men who had watched their city burn twice, who had lost everything, who were fighting for ashes and memory and revenge. They didn't just hold, they pushed forward. The Theban Greeks broke, fled toward their city. The Athenians let them go. There were bigger problems. Because news was spreading across the battlefield. Mardonius was dead. The Persians were running, and they were running toward their fortified camp. The Persian camp was a fortress, wooden walls, trenches, towers. Mardonius had spent weeks preparing it, a fallback position in case something went wrong. Now, tens of thousands of panicked soldiers were streaming through its gates. Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Indians, men from every corner of the empire, all of them running from the Greek death that was chasing them. If they could hold the camp, they might survive. They might regroup. They might even escape north, back toward Asia. The Greeks reached the walls. The Spartans arrived first. But Spartans weren't siege troops. They excelled in open battle, phalanx against phalanx. Assaulting fortifications? That required different skills. They tried anyway. They threw themselves at the wooden walls, tried to tear them down with bare hands and spears. Persian defenders hurled everything they had. Arrows, javelins, rocks, anything that could kill. The assault stalled. For a desperate hour, it looked like the Persians might hold. Then the Athenians arrived. Athens had a tradition of siege warfare that Sparta lacked. They knew how to break fortifications, how to find weak points, how to coordinate an assault. They hit the Persian camp like a hammer. One section of wall collapsed. Athenians poured through the gap. Then another section. Then another. The Greeks were inside. And what followed? Herodotus calls it a slaughter. The word barely captures it. Tens of thousands of Persian soldiers packed inside a fortified camp with nowhere to run. Greeks streaming through multiple breaches, killing everything that moved. The Persians couldn't form ranks, couldn't organize resistance, couldn't do anything but die. Men were cut down in their tents, killed as they tried to surrender. Butchered in heaps so thick, the Greeks had to climb over bodies to reach the living. Herodotus gives us numbers. Of the tens of thousands of Persians in that camp, he claims only 3,000 survived. 3,000. The rest died in one afternoon. By sunset, it was over. The Persian army, the force that had burned Athens, that had conquered everything from India to Egypt, that had seemed invincible for a generation, was gone. Not defeated. gone. Some survivors escaped, small groups fleeing north, trying to reach the Hellespont, trying to get back to Asia. Greek cavalry hunted them for days. The fortified camp was a charnel house. Persian treasure, gold, silver, furniture from the king's own tent, lay scattered among the corpses. The Greeks wandered through it in disbelief. They found Mardonius's body. Pausanias, the Spartan commander, was urged to cut off the head and put it on a stake. That's what Xerxes had done to Leonidas at Thermopylae. Pausanias refused. "That is behavior for barbarians, not Greeks," he said, "and I would not please even barbarians by doing it." They buried Mardonius with honor. Then they divided the spoils. The wealth was staggering. A tenth was set aside for the gods, offerings to Apollo at Delphi, to Zeus at Olympia, to Poseidon at the Isthmus. From the golden tripods and bronze offerings, they made a monument, a column of 3 serpents twisted together, 18 feet tall, and on that column they inscribed the names. Not the names of heroes, not the names of kings, the names of cities. 31 Greek city-states that had stood together against the impossible. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Tegea, Megara, and 26 others. The Serpent Column. It still exists today, in Istanbul of all places, where Constantine moved it 1,500 years later. But the names remain. A monument to the day that Greece refused to die. So what actually happened at Plataea? Let's be clear about this. Because the story gets mythologized, it gets simplified, it becomes Spartans defeated Persia and loses. Everything that made it miraculous. Here's the truth. A coalition of Greek city-states, rivals who had spent centuries fighting each other, united against an existential threat. They assembled the largest Greek army in history. They marched north to face a Persian force that outnumbered them, outsupplied them, and held every strategic advantage. For 11 days, they refused to fight on Persian terms. They endured cavalry raids. They watched their water supply destroyed. They suffered and waited and held together through sheer stubborn will. Then they attempted a night retreat that went catastrophically wrong. Their army scattered into 3 pieces. Their position fell apart. And at that moment, the moment of maximum vulnerability, Mardonius attacked. He threw everything at the Spartans, the immortals, his elite cavalry, his personal guard, the finest soldiers the Persian Empire possessed. The Spartans held. They prayed while arrows killed them. They waited for omens while their allies screamed for action. And when the gods finally spoke, they advanced into the storm. One man, Mnestis, a name history barely remembers, found his way to Mardonius and killed him. And in one afternoon, the Persian army disintegrated. That's what happened. That's the miracle of Plataea. But why does it matter? You're watching this video in a world shaped by Greek ideas, democracy, philosophy, drama, science, history itself. The concept of recording the past to understand the present was invented by Greeks. None of it survives if Mardonius wins. This isn't speculation. This is what Persia did to conquered peoples. They were absorbed. Their cultures were diluted. Their religions were tolerated but marginalized. They became provinces of an empire, their identities slowly dissolving into the vastness of Persian administration. Greece would have become a satrapy. Athens would have been rebuilt as a Persian city. The great flowering of classical civilization? It doesn't happen. No Socrates, no Plato, no Aristotle, no Alexander, or if he exists, he's a Persian vassal, not a conqueror. The Roman Republic, which built itself on Greek models, transformed beyond recognition. Everything changes. One afternoon, one battle, one spear thrust to a Persian general's skull. That's how close it was. There's a lesson here, and it's not the one you might expect. The lesson isn't Spartans were invincible. They weren't. They'd been defeated before. They'd be defeated again. Within a century, Thebes would crush Sparta so completely that it never recovered. The lesson isn't Greeks were superior warriors. Man for man, perhaps. But the Persians had numbers, resources, and organization that dwarfed anything Greece could muster. The lesson is simpler and darker. Mardonius lost because he made one mistake. He saw the Greek lines falling apart. He saw confusion, disorder, vulnerability. And he thought, they're running. They're broken. This is my chance. He was wrong. The Spartans weren't running. They weren't confused. They were doing exactly what they'd been trained to do since childhood. Staying calm in chaos, maintaining discipline when everything looked hopeless, waiting for their moment. Mardonius saw disorder. The Spartans saw opportunity. He attacked what he thought was a retreating army. He found a coiled spring. Think about the decisions that led to that moment. Xerxes decided to go home. He could have stayed. He could have led the army himself. But Salamis had broken something in him, and he ran. Mardonius decided to stay. Ambition, pride, the dream of ruling Greece. He chose to risk everything. The Greeks decided to unite. After centuries of war with each other, they looked at the Persian horde and chose the impossible: cooperation. Pausanias decided to wait for favorable omens. While his men died around him, he knelt and prayed. Any other commander might have attacked immediately and lost formation in the chaos. He waited. His patience held the phalanx together. Mardonius decided to lead from the front. Brave, honorable, fatal. If he had commanded from behind, his death wouldn't have shattered Persian morale. But he wanted glory. He wanted to be the man who broke the Spartans. He died for it. And Mnestis? He made a decision too. In the chaos of battle, surrounded by 1,000 elite Persian guards, he saw Mardonius. He could have held position, stayed in formation, done the safe thing. He attacked, found a way through, struck the blow. One decision after another. A chain of choices stretching back months, years, generations, all of it converging on a single afternoon in August. The Serpent Column stood at Delphi for 800 years. Then Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor, moved it to his new capital, Constantinople, the city that would become Istanbul. It stands there still, broken now, the serpent heads lost to time, but the base remains. And on that base, if you look closely, you can still read the names. 31 cities, Spartans and Athenians, Corinthians and Tegeans, Megarians and Plataeans, rivals who became allies, enemies who became brothers. They didn't know they were saving Western civilization. They didn't know philosophers and scientists and artists would build on their sacrifice for millennia. They only knew the Persians were coming. They only knew their cities would burn. They only knew they had to stand. So they stood. And in one afternoon, one bloody, impossible, miraculous afternoon, they won. Mardonius woke that morning as the most powerful man in Greece. He commanded an empire's army. He held every advantage. By sunset, he was dead. His army was destroyed. His empire's ambitions were finished forever. He made one mistake. He thought the Greeks were running. He was wrong.